Chapter 4.
The smell of fresh pizza filled the small apartment, cutting softly through the lingering sense of newness. 2 paper plates sat on the small table near the window, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor between them. Jessica took a quiet bite, then glanced toward Edna. "It was Pearl," she said after a moment. Edna looked up gently. "She's the one who found me. At the bench." Edna listened without interrupting. "I didn't even know where I was going," Jessica continued. "I just needed to be somewhere. Quiet." She paused, her voice steady but thoughtful. And then she sat down beside me like it wasn't strange at all. A faint smile touched her lips. It felt like God had answered something I didn't even know how to ask properly. The words settled into the room. Edna nodded slowly. "Yes," she said softly. "I understand that." Jessica looked up, curious now. Edna rested her hands lightly around her tea. "I had a moment like that myself," she said. "A couple of years ago." She took a breath, not heavy, just enough to shift into something remembered. "My husband had passed the year before," she said quietly. "And not long after that, my son and his family moved to the mainland. Work transfer." Jessica listened without speaking. It all happened quickly, too quickly, really. Edna gave a small, reflective smile. "One day the house felt full, and the next it was just me." She paused. "I had already retired from teaching. There was no schedule, no classroom, no voices filling the day. The room felt quieter just hearing it. I have a sister," Edna continued, "but she lives in assisted living. And I knew that wasn't where I wanted to be. Not yet." Jessica nodded gently. "So I started keeping busy," Edna said, "helping with the food bank through the church, making calls, visiting local businesses, asking for donations." She gave a small shrug. "I've always been Anglican. It was something to do, and it felt like the right thing." Jessica smiled faintly. "It sounds like you." Edna smiled back. "Well, I was trying." "One of those calls led me here," she continued, "to Pearl." Jessica leaned in slightly. "She mentioned she had a unit available," Edna said. "Second floor, no elevator, and she made sure I knew there were children living above it." Jessica smiled slightly. "That sounds like Pearl." "Oh, she was very clear," Edna said, amused. "2 young children. Could be noisy." A pause. "I took it anyway." "And were they?" Jessica asked gently. Edna's smile widened just slightly. "At first, yes." They both laughed quietly. "But then I met them properly. Tiffany is 8. Sam is 10. Her voice softened slightly. "Their mother, Janet, she's raising them on her own." Jessica listened closely now. "Before long, I was helping with homework after school," Edna said. "Just a little at first. Then snacks. Then staying until Janet got home from work." She glanced down at her hands briefly. "It gave me something back that I hadn't realized I missed." Jessica's expression softened. "They started calling me Granny," Edna said quietly. The words sat warmly in the space between them. "We became, well, closer than just tenants." Jessica nodded slowly. "I never charged her," Edna added. "I didn't feel right about that." "And her?" Jessica asked. "She insisted on helping in her own way," Edna said. "Groceries, picking up prescriptions, little errands that made life easier." Edna smiled. "It worked." Jessica leaned back slightly, taking it in. "It sounds like Pearl knew exactly what she was doing," she said. Edna gave a small, knowing nod. "She has a way of seeing what people need, and how they might fit together." Jessica hesitated, then asked the question that had been quietly forming. "Do you ever find the noise too much?" Edna smiled, already expecting it. "Well now," she said, reaching up lightly. "That's what this is for." She adjusted her hearing aid slightly. "I turn it down when needed." Jessica laughed softly. "But truth be told," Edna added. "It's not nearly as bad as I expected. Those children know I'm downstairs." Her voice softened again. "And they care." Silence settled between them, but it was no longer empty. It was full of stories, of connection, of something that stretched beyond hardship. Jessica looked around her apartment, the table, the chair, the small pieces that had appeared throughout the day. "This place," she said quietly. Edna followed her gaze. "Yes," she said. "It becomes something more than just where you live." Jessica nodded slowly. As they continued putting the last few things in place, neither woman felt any need to rush the conversation. It was curious, Jessica thought. Pearl had hardly spoken about herself that day, yet somehow every story seemed to lead back to her, not because she drew attention to herself, but because of the quiet faith that seemed to shape the way she lived. Jessica folded another sweater, turning the thought over in her mind. Clothing lay folded in careful stacks across the bed as Jessica worked her way through the small suitcase she had brought with her. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Edna moved easily through the room, smoothing the sheets and adjusting the corners of the bed with practiced familiarity. "It won't take long before this feels like yours," she said, stepping back to look at her work. Jessica gave a small nod. "I think it already kind of does." There was a quiet pause. Not uncomfortable, just space. Jessica folded another shirt, then spoke without looking up. "Can I ask you something?" Edna glanced over, gentle as always. "You can ask me anything." Jessica hesitated briefly, as though deciding how to phrase it. "I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses," she said. The words came carefully. "And, until recently, that's all I've ever known." Edna nodded, not interrupting. "We were taught to be careful," Jessica continued, "about other Christian groups, about what they believe." She placed the shirt neatly into a drawer. "I don't really know what other people believe." She looked up. "What about you?" Edna rested a hand lightly on the back of the chair before sitting. "I've been part of the Anglican Church most of my life," she said simply. Jessica watched her closely. "It's structured," Edna continued. "Liturgical. There are readings, prayers, a rhythm to it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "And for many years, that rhythm felt steady, familiar." Jessica nodded slightly. "But over time," Edna continued, "I began to notice something." Jessica leaned against the dresser, listening. "Some Sundays," Edna said, "I would leave feeling encouraged. Something in the message would stay with me, and I'd go home and read my Bible, wanting to understand more." She paused. "And other Sundays?" Jessica asked it quietly. Edna smiled faintly. "I'd leave feeling puzzled." Jessica's expression softened. "Confused?" "Yes," Edna said, not quite sure where what I had heard lined up with what I was reading. She glanced down briefly. Sometimes it felt like what was being said was more about what people wanted to hear than what Scripture actually said. Jessica considered that. "And what did you do?" she asked. Edna looked up. "I read," she said simply. "I went back to the Scriptures and tried to make sense of it." She gave a small shrug. "It didn't always come easily." Something clicked in Jessica's expression. "That's like the Bereans," she said. Edna's eyes lit slightly. "Yes," she said, "exactly." Jessica nodded, more certain now. "They examined the Scriptures to see if what they were being told was true." Edna smiled warmly. "Acts 17:11, she said. "I know it well." A quiet stillness settled between them. Not uncertainty, but recognition. Jessica folded the last of her things slowly. "Do you think," she began, then paused. Edna waited. "Do you think there's such a thing as the right denomination?" Jessica asked. The question hung in the space between them, heavier than the others. Edna leaned back slightly, considering. "I asked something very similar once," she said. Jessica looked up. "Pearl and I were talking, not long after I moved in." A small pause. "She pointed out something I hadn't thought about in quite that way before." Jessica waited. In Revelation, Edna said, there are letters written to 7 different churches. Jessica nodded faintly. They were all part of the same body, Edna continued, but each had its own strengths and its own problems. She let that settle. And Jesus spoke about the wheat and the weeds growing together, she added, that they wouldn't be separated until the proper time. Jessica stood very still. So, she said slowly. So, Edna replied gently, it may not be as simple as one group being entirely right and another being entirely wrong. Jessica let out a quiet breath. It might be more, Edna continued, about whether someone is honestly seeking what is true, she met Jessica's gaze, and willing to measure what they hear against Scripture. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from uncertainty. It was the kind that comes when something begins to make sense, even if just a little. Jessica looked down at her hands, then back up again. That feels different, she said. Edna nodded. Yes, she said softly. The sound of children's voices drifted faintly through the open hallway as the school day came to an end. Edna paused, listening. That'll be mine, she said with a small, knowing smile. Jessica glanced toward her. Tiffany and Sam, Edna added, my afternoon shift. Jessica smiled. I suppose I shouldn't keep you. Edna moved toward the door, but paused just long enough to place a gentle hand on Jessica's arm. We'll finish our conversation another time. Jessica nodded. I'd like that. Edna smiled. I thought you might. This time, it felt different. Then she was gone, her steady presence moving back into the rhythm of the place she had come to belong to.